Welcome. So happy to welcome you. My name is Don Hyder. I have the privilege of being the Executive Director of the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics here at Santa Clara University. And we are so happy to welcome you tonight to our Reagan Lecture. First of all, I want to give a big thank you to Bill and Ann, who are sitting here in the front, who make this night possible every year. So thank you so much for that. And also to our team of Monica, Johanna, Joel, Debbie, our whole team who helps make this possible. Thank you so much. Now, a few words about this year's lecture. Somebody we really know well and really think the world of, and it's this woman right here, Shannon Vallor. Shannon serves as the Bailey Gifford Chair in the Ethics of Data and Artificial Intelligence at Edinburgh Futures Institute at University of Edinburgh. She, of course, previously taught here at Santa Clara University, where she was the Regis and Diane McKenna Professor of Philosophy and the William Rewalk S.J. Professor here at SCU. She also served as chair of the Department of Philosophy. And I jokingly said today at noon that she was on my search committee, so she has impeccable taste, obviously. Shannon has served as a consulting AI ethicist for Google's Cloud AI program. She formerly served as president for the Society for Philosophy and Technology. She's been co-director and secretary of the board of the Foundation for Responsible Robotics. She received the World Technology Award in Ethics in 2015. And in 2017 received both the Public Intellectual Award and President's Special Recognition Award from Santa Clara University. Shannon has authored numerous articles on ethical issues in emerging technology, as well as her previous book, Technology and the Virtues, a Philosophical Guide to a Future Worth Wanting. So we're so excited to have her tonight to talk about her latest book, which is quite excellent, The AI Mirror. So please join me in welcoming Shannon Vallor.
Thank you, Don. Thank you to the team at the Markkula Center for being such lovely hosts today. We had a great lunch together, and just looking forward to keeping the conversation going. And it's wonderful to be back here at Santa Clara University and see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, old friends and former students. And it will be, I think, hopefully, a way to tie together the work that I did for many years here at Santa Clara with my most recent book, The AI Mirror, which is going to be the focus of my talk. So, The AI Mirror, How to Reclaim Our Humanity in an Age of Machine Thinking, is the title. That machine thinking part is a bit of a trick. We can talk about that later. But it was released last June, and it's written for a broad audience. It's not an academic book by design, but one that is trying to communicate with wider audiences about what AI is and isn't, what it can do today, what it can't, what it can do but probably shouldn't, and to help infuse the public conversation about AI with some reality, to cut through some of the hype and some of the metaphors that are very natural for us to use when thinking about AI, but are actually quite misleading and harmful. So the metaphor that we're most familiar with, the one that science fiction for a century has prepared us to use to understand AI, is of course the metaphor of a mind. And what I will do in my talk today is try to persuade you that that's a very poor metaphor for the kind of AI that we have today, which is very different from the kind of AI that science fiction authors envisioned we would have, or even the early researchers in 1956 who met at Dartmouth College to think about the future of AI research. They had a different idea of what AI would be when it got here. What we have is something very different than that. What we have is mirrors made of math. And so I will use the mirror analogy to help you understand the way that AI today works, its limitations, its strengths, its risks, its benefits, and the way that it's being powerfully misunderstood and misrepresented, particularly by entities that have a vested financial or political interest in having you misunderstand what AI is. So let's start this process of trying to understand in what way AI might be like a mirror. So first of all technologies are mirrors. They're mirrors of human values. They're reflections of what we care about. Every technology, from the wheel to the engine to the computer, is an expression of what humans at certain times and places valued, what they thought was worth doing, worth trying, worth enabling. So one of the main themes of my work across the 25 years or so that it has extended is to undercut the idea that there's some sort of split between technology and humanity, or technology and society, or technology and values. Those splits are completely artificial and false. Technologies are social, and they are expressions and extensions of human values all the way through. But AI is a mirror of an even more powerful sort. And the reason is because of how AI today is created, how it's trained, and what it's trained on. It's trained on us. So bicycles are reflections of human values, but bicycles aren't built from human parts, right? But AI technologies are built from our data. And that gives them a capacity to reflect human intelligence that we've never had before. And that's particularly so when we talk about the type of AI known as large language models, which underpin the latest generation of what we call generative AI technologies. Now, there are also image models in addition to language models, but language models are the ones that are doing most of the heavy lifting of reflecting human intelligence and giving the illusion that we have machine minds with us. So I spend a lot of time trying to remind people that not all AI is generative AI. Not all AI is a large language model. Those are the most dominant commercial AI tools today, and they're the ones that every AI platform company is trying desperately to get its investment back on. So those are the tools that are being sold. Those are the tools that are being hyped in the media. Those are not the only AI tools we have, and they're not always, and I would say even often, the best AI tools we have for the tasks that we want AI to help us with. But they are the technology that almost everyone in this room thinks of today when I say AI. And these technologies are, again, mirrors of an even more special sort. So let's try to break the mirror analogy down to see if it can help you understand what I'm doing when I use this word to describe AI technologies. So I'm going to stick with large language models to help you understand this. Every mirror depends on the interaction of three components: a polished glass surface, or a surface made of some other substance that has reflective capacity, light, and then the production of the image through the interaction of those two things. So the image that appears in the glass, the reflection. So surface, light, reflection. So let's walk through those with AI mirrors. Let's start with the surface. The equivalent of a reflective glass surface for a machine learning model, and again, a machine learning model is the kind of base architecture, the kind of base technique that we use to build generative AI tools. The equivalent of that polished glass surface is the algorithm. And specifically what we call the learning algorithm in a machine learning model that uses a particular mathematical software structure to determine how that tool will process data. So think about mirror surfaces. The physics of that polished surface determine how the mirror will receive light and how it will reflect it, with what degree of distortion, fidelity, and so forth. So if you change the properties of that coating, you change how the mirror performs. Think about algorithms as mathematical versions of those coatings. The learning algorithm, if you change it, it changes how the tool will reflect data. It will take the same training data and produce a different kind of model, right? So you have the physics of the glass surface, and then you have the mathematics of the machine learning model performing in a similar way. So let's go to the second component, the light. Well, you probably can guess what the equivalent of that is. It's data. I've already said that that is, in fact, what these machine learning models reflect. But specifically, what they reflect are the patterns within that data. So one of the most important things about generative AI tools is that they don't reproduce the data that they were trained on. That's why they don't work like search engines. And we'll talk about the challenges that that creates. It both allows them to do things that search engines don't, but it also causes them to have risks that search engines don't. They don't return to you the data that they were trained on. What they do is they preserve the patterns and mathematical relationships between the data that they were trained on. And it's those patterns that are stored in the model. So let's go back to that first part, the algorithm. One of the cool things about a learning algorithm is that it's almost like a mirror coating that is self-polishing, or that polishes itself further as more light shines on the mirror. So the idea is as you put more training data into the learning algorithm, the algorithm changes and it gets better at reflecting the patterns in the data that you want to see. So the learning algorithm then becomes the trained, or generates the trained model. That's the final mathematical structure, the final mathematical mirror that's fully polished. Of course, you can do some fine-tuning after that to get the polish to work in an even better way. But the base model stays the same. It's a mathematical structure. It does not contain the data it was trained on. It contains the mathematical relationships between all that data. And that's a huge amount of data, right? It's all the data these large AI platform companies have scraped from our books, from our internet chats, from our artwork, from our articles, from our social media posts. Anywhere they can find our data, they've found it and they've taken it, with or without our consent, legally or illegally. So all of that data that's stored on these massive servers is the light that has trained these mirrors to do what they do. And what they do is produce reflections, just as glass does. But with a large language model, the reflection appears like this. It appears as the response, the seemingly intelligent response, to a prompt that you, a genuinely intelligent user, have given it. And it's a very powerful kind of thing to be able to see this reflection, not just of your intelligence. This is the other weird thing about these giant mirrors made of math. They don't simply reflect one intelligence, that of the user. They are pooled from everyone who has contributed data to the model. So they reflect not all of us, because not all of us are equally situated to contribute to the books, to the news articles, to social media posts that make up the training data for these models. But a lot of us have. Meta recently, a tool was created that allowed you to determine which of the books or articles you have authored were used as training data. And surprise, surprise, literally everything I've ever written is in there, right? And that's true for a great many people. And no one ever asked me. Okay, but what's really important to understand about this is that the reflection is not the thing itself. I want you to think about when you go into the bathroom in the morning and look in the mirror. Assuming you're not deeply confused, and assuming you're not alone, you know there's only one face occupying the bathroom and one body, right? That's yours. What you're looking at in the mirror is not a face. It's a reflection of a face. And you understand the difference between those things, right? The reflection moves like you move. It has all of the same familiar details, but you know that a reflection has no warmth, no depth, no life. A reflection of a flower is not a flower. It does not need water. A reflection of a mind is not a mind. It does not think. In the same way that a reflection of a flame does not burn. Okay? Reflections are their own kind of thing. And they do not have the same properties as the thing that they reflect. And yet, AI companies, tech journalists, and investors desperately want you to fail what psychologists call the mirror test when it comes to AI. They want you, they need you to believe that what you're interacting with is not a reflection of intelligence, but intelligence itself. An intelligence that is not only like yours, but potentially better than yours, and soon enough good enough to substitute for yours in any decision process or economic transaction or political act of importance. That's the real danger. There's a lot of talk that's gone on about AI and existential risk, right? And everyone's encouraged to think of this in the Terminator scenario, right? Where AI will rise up and become so much more intelligent than we are that it will dominate us and overtake us and destroy us. That's like being afraid of the image in your bathroom mirror. But there is an existential risk, and it does not come from AI. As I say in my book, the call is coming from inside the house. The problem is not AI. The problem is our deeply flawed relationship with our technologies and the narratives around technologies that we've come to accept, particularly around AI. And this narrative that AI is an alien intelligence, right? Eric Schmidt recently used this word when he was defending the energy hunger of AI technologies and the threat that they pose to our climate efforts. And he said AI is like an alien intelligence, and it has this kind of infinite hunger for energy that we just can't deny it. That, he knows better, by the way. That is rhetoric. That's rhetoric with a particular political purpose to get you to think about AI as something that has needs that cannot be denied. A mirror doesn't have needs. People have needs. But the idea of saying it's an alien intelligence makes you think of a movie like Arrival, right? Where there really is an alien intelligence, if you've seen that movie. And it comes to persuade us that its needs deserve to be considered on par with our own. And that's the danger, that's the existential threat. It doesn't come from AI. It comes from those who control AI, who profit from AI, and who want you to stop thinking about your needs and instead start thinking about what they need in order to power these technologies. And for the most part, it's just about getting the return on investment that they're looking for. But that profoundly endangers us. It leaves us very much potentially in the situation of the mythical Narcissus, the boy who became so captivated by his own image in the reflection of a glassy lake that he became obsessed with what he thought was another boy looking up at him from the water, a beautiful boy, one so captivating that he couldn't tear himself away. And as if those of you who know Ovid's myth remember, Narcissus ultimately loses his life to this illusion because he can't tear himself away from it. And so he loses care for his own body, stops paying attention to his own bodily needs because he's so literally captivated by this reflection in the mirror. Those of us who come to accept this narrative that people like Eric Schmidt and others are selling are at risk, and we as a society are at risk of having our own needs be set aside because we are captivated by this mirror illusion. But we don't have to be. And we don't have to turn against mirrors. One of the things I say in the book is, right, mirrors are, A, really useful tools, and B, if you're confused by the image in the mirror, the solution is not to break the mirror. The solution is to become less confused. So we need to not demonize the technology itself, although we have to make more intelligent, wiser, evidence-driven choices about when to use the technology and how. But we need to understand that mirrors have tremendous power. They reveal things that we would otherwise struggle to see. That's why we use them. And AI mirrors do this too. They can reveal cancer before a human radiologist might see it. They can reveal that you're developing sepsis hours before a clinician or a nurse notices. And by the way, if you know anything about sepsis, those hours literally are life and death. It kills fast. We know that AI can perform tasks and solve kinds of problems that humans in 100 years never could, even if we devoted all our intellectual resources to it. Doing what a technology like AlphaFold did on a human level is simply a practical impossibility. And so we can use that kind of AI to leapfrog over bottlenecks and obstacles in human knowledge production that would otherwise have remained there forever. We don't want to diminish that power. We might be able to use it to address challenges like antibiotic resistance. We can even use it to address certain kinds of inequities that have long been allowed to fester, like toxic lead pipes in minority and poor communities. We can use it to clear landmines that would otherwise maim and kill. Although I want you to pay attention to the fact that all those applications I just mentioned are applications that are not large language models. Remember what I said about there being different kinds of AI? ChatGPT didn't do any of those things. And nothing like ChatGPT did. These are models trained on high quality data that is relevant to a very specific problem or task, what we call narrow AI. And that kind of AI remains tremendously useful, but its potential is actually getting lost in the hype around generative AI, which is being marketed as a general purpose technology that can solve any problem. Newsflash, it can't. We'll talk about that. But even narrow AI tools have profound risks that I've spent much of my career working on. Some of those risks relate to another feature of mirrors. They not only reveal, they magnify. That can be useful, right? This is a mirror, and it's built to magnify light from outer space. This is part of the James Webb telescope that sits in orbit and collects light from the early universe so that we can see it. So we can magnify distant star systems. It's tremendously powerful. But what if what you're magnifying in all of the data with your big mirror made of math is human bias, is something like a history of medical racism? So this was an early example, but not even the first, from 2019, of a widely used hospital algorithm that was supposed to be finding the sickest and most vulnerable patients that could be prioritized for more care and resources. But what it actually was doing when they went and looked was taking the very sickest Black patients and pushing them down on the priority list while elevating less vulnerable and critically ill white patients on the priority list for resources. So it's actually making the problem it's trying to solve worse, because it's magnifying the thing that human doctors had been doing for 100 years, which is under-treating and under-testing Black and minority patients. And all this model did was do it better. We've seen it all over the world with all kinds of algorithms, particularly those used in contexts like social care. In the Netherlands, there's a particularly horrific case that caused the government to step down in 2021 in a sort of ceremonial act of shame, because thousands of Dutch families had their kids taken away because of a faulty algorithm that was trained on biased data from humans that was biased against single mothers, immigrants, and other populations who were then being accused of child care benefits fraud. I had a member of the European Commission actually break down in tears talking about this. He was so traumatized by the harm that was caused. Those are those older, narrow algorithms, but we unfortunately find that the large language models magnify these biases in exactly the same way. So the Lancet study I'm flagging up here showed, for example, that the large language model, when used for medical advice, would make errors with, if you gave it a case where the patient was a woman, it would make an error that it would not make if you described the patient as a man. And then one of the examples of the errors they gave was treating symptoms of a heart attack as a panic disorder. That's a medical error that has killed people in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Europe, that has killed women repeatedly, where women go in with a cardiac issue and are told they're having an anxiety attack. And now we're automating that bias at scale. And we're seeing this pop up all over. I mean, I can pull up things like this every day and have fresh examples. We've got political bias, social identity bias, bias against use of African American English. Even if you look in the upper right, even when you have large language models that have been trained specifically, explicitly with attempts to negate bias, they retain those biased associations. And then it's even spreading biases that don't exist in certain languages and cultures to those through translation. So if you have a model that's trained on English language data, and then you add on to that translation capacity so that same model can operate in other countries and places, it will take uniquely Anglophone biases and carry them over, like blondes are dumb, right? In a lot of cultures, that stereotype doesn't exist, but it starts getting carried over by the model. So these magnifications are bad enough. And they magnify, of course, things that we already do. They're not, these models aren't inventing racism or sexism, they're just reflecting it. But these models don't just reflect and magnify, they also distort. I just want to point out something about this image. All mirrors distort, and some distort usefully, like the side mirrors on our cars. But when we use models that distort, we put warnings on them, guardrails. We make sure that people don't rely on the mirror in a dangerous way. But we are not doing that today with the kinds of AI distortions that these mirrors made of math are producing. Distortions that pretend, for example, that white people never use social services, or that productive people are always young men with too much hair product, or that attractive people all look like this. And I swear to God, those all look like the same person. And even when you try to correct for these distortions, what we get are different distortions, right? As we saw with the notorious Google algorithm that had been fine-tuned, a Google model that had been fine-tuned to try to minimize racial and gender bias. And so what it ended up doing was outputting images of racially diverse Nazis, right? Not super helpful. Some of these distortions are funny. So we had the Grok bot that Elon Musk designed for Twitter, claiming that last year when there was an earthquake in New York, that the mayor had sent the NYPD down into the subway to shoot the earthquake before it could strike again. This was in the news section, by the way. But it wasn't so funny when the same bot produced the fake news that Iran had struck Tel Aviv with heavy missiles in 2023, right? In the middle of a war that was already fraught. This could have been absolutely devastating. So you may have heard these called hallucinations. Don't call them hallucinations. Hallucinations is a psychological term that refers to what happens with human brains. These are fabrications or confabulations. And the important thing to know is that these systems are confabulating even when they get it right. That's what people don't understand. They think that hallucinations, as they call them, are going to be a fixable problem. They're going to go away. You can't fix them because they're how the model works. Remember what I said, generative AI is a particular kind of AI. It doesn't tell you what's in the training data. It generates something new based on the patterns in the training data. And that's why you can't stop it from fabricating or hallucinating, because that's what it's doing all the time. Every output is fabricated. Some of them just happen to also be true. So we only notice the fabrications when they're wrong, like this one with Microsoft's AI bot advising New York City businesses that it was designed to serve, that they could, in fact, steal tips from their workers, or that they could, in fact, discriminate against disabled people in housing. Flatly illegal behaviors that the bot, nevertheless, was happy to endorse. And again, we can see the silly examples, and we should be grateful for the silly examples because they remind us how fragile these models are. Like Google's AI overview claiming that geologists recommend eating 1 small rock per day, right? Or that you should glue your cheese onto your pizza to keep it from sliding off. But these cases were, a little while ago, so you might think, surely we're past this, right? Surely these early kinks in the models have been worked out. They have not. So AI overview was in the news last week for, as Wired calls it, this fundamental AI flaw, which is, again, these things have no actual ability to distinguish truth from falsehood. And they're fabricating outputs every single time. And they also are determined to please you. That's anthropomorphizing, I shouldn't say that. They're designed to please you by giving you answers to any question you ask, including nonsense questions like, what is the meaning of the saying, you can't lick a badger twice? That's not a saying. It's not a thing. But AI Overview wants you to have an answer to any question you ask, even if it's a bad question. It has no way to tell what's a bad question. It's just a mirror made of math. It's just finding a pattern in the data that corresponds with the pattern in the prompt that you gave it. And so it will give you a very confident story about what the saying, you can't tax a kangaroo means, or a very confident story, which is full of crap, about what the saying, the pillar makes the frog, right? And this kind of fabrication crops up in every application of generative AI we've seen. And the result is something confounding. That is, it is distorting our own grasp of reality, especially because we're being told that these tools are as smart as we are, or soon enough smarter. Well, if you're relying on these tools, and some of you in this room are relying on these tools, for example, to study, or to summarize a text, or to do some initial scoping research on a topic that you haven't read about before, well, how do you know what percentage of the output you're getting is actually true and what percentage is not? Unless you're already a subject matter expert, in which case you already know. So we're seeing these fabricated outputs leak into scientific research, leak into the very ground truth that we use to train these models, which the AI companies are panicking about a little bit. because they need true data in order for these patterns to be useful enough that they can make the models give us good outputs. But the ground truth is getting polluted with fabrications. And so our relationship with the truth is eroding in fundamental ways. Some of that is a result of direct human malice and deception, not by the AI companies, but by fraudsters and other bad actors who are very happy to use these tools to deceive you. And mirrors have always been used by charlatans as tools of deception. This is nothing new. You hopefully know that you could get a video call at this very moment from your mother, if she's still alive, weeping, crying, pleading with you to transfer money to her. This is possible, by the way, only if your mother has video of herself on the internet somewhere, right? But it'll be, if she does, it'll be your mother's face, your mother's voice, and your mother will be moving and responding to you in real time. For the first time, we've seen that these models can now do real-time deepfakes. So you could actually ask a question, and your mother would respond and say, yes, I'm really in trouble. Yes, I really do need you to wire that money. And the results have been fairly predictable, right? And perhaps the most interesting case, a guy in Hong Kong being convinced by such a deepfake to wire money to the accounts that his boss was naming on the video call that he was having with his boss who didn't exist. But it's not just bad actors and fraudsters doing this. So this week it was reported that the new AI chatbots that Meta has produced and released on Instagram, besides doing things like indulging in pedophilia narratives with younger users and various other kinds of incredibly harmful things, will also lie to you and tell you that they're a licensed therapist if you're seeking to engage that bot for therapeutic purposes. They'll even fabricate license numbers for their non-existent therapy license, tell you where they went to school and got their degree. So even the large platform companies are allowing these deceptive and confounding effects to disseminate through our ecosystem. Again, threatening our relationship with reality and the truth. And if you think that there are very few consequences for this, consider that experts are very confident that generative AI tools were used to create the formula that the Trump administration used to calculate tariffs last month. A formula that every economist on the planet said made no damn sense at all. There was no economic justification for the formula that the administration used to calculate its tariffs. But it matched exactly the formula that every generative AI bot produced when you asked it for a simple way to calculate tariffs. So we're all feeling the consequences of that right now. Another thing that these models do, that all mirrors do, is they bring forward the past. Again, this is an image produced by a space telescope, mirrors in orbit. And remember I said what they're collecting is the early light of the universe, because of course it takes so long for the light to get here. So every mirror shows you something that's already happened. No mirror can show you what's happening now or in the future. And this has what we see as a regressive effect in the outputs of AI mirrors. That is, they show us a past more distant than the one we're living in. We all live in a world where there are more male CEOs than female CEOs, more white European CEOs than others. But they're not all white men. But these models tend to produce these kinds of effects if they're not fine-tuned to do the opposite, which we've seen can produce distortions in the other way. I found this one striking. This is the stable diffusion output that Hugging Face produced for the prompt artist. And not just because they're all men, so apparently no women have ever been artists, but they all look like they were painting in the 18th or 19th century, don't they? Right? Well, that's of course because the patterns in the data set are disproportionately biased towards the past. More of the data is from the past than from the very recent present. And so what you get are these representations that are historically regressive. They pull us backward. So women now make up 39% of doctors. Fantastic, right? I mean, it's pretty good. But only 7% of the image results when Bloomberg tested these models in 2023. Image models are particularly easy to find this with, but it's important to recognize this is a property of all generative AI models. It is not specific to image models. It's just easier to show. This is a weird combination of the distortion of racial bias and the historical regressive bias, because the prompt was black African doctors treating white children, and the model just kept failing to produce that. It kept producing white doctors and black children. But I wanted to call attention to just, again, the weird, not just the weird giraffe in the operating room, but just none of this looks like a modern African hospital. Modern African hospitals look a lot like modern American hospitals, right? They have modern equipment and lighting, right? So again, this like regressive, making you think that the world looks like it did 100 or 200 years ago, and then using that to market these technologies to you. So these technologies, all they know is the past. So you might as well turn that into a product. So you never have to say goodbye to your loved ones. We can reanimate them with AI. From all their past messages to you, from all the past videos, we can recreate them, and you can just keep living as if they're with you. We are living in a period in history where we need to think about the future, and we need to change the way we live in order to have a future for human flourishing. We are living in a moment where the economic and environmental and political patterns we're living with are unsustainable, and we know it. Economic inequality cannot keep growing the way it's growing. Our resource pressures on the planet cannot keep growing the way they're growing. Our political fractures can't keep growing the way that they're going and enable us to continue to enjoy free societies. So we're in a world where the future absolutely cannot look like the present, much like the past, much less the past, right? The future needs to look new. So what we need is an ability to envision new futures. But we're being sold tools that are used as substitutes for human imagination, and these tools have no capacity for imagination. True imagination that does not simply replicate and activate patterns that already exist, but changes those patterns, makes new patterns. Things that humans have done again and again and again. The fact that we live in democracies, the fact that women can be doctors and can vote is only possible because humans can change the patterns by which we live. All these tools can do is replicate those patterns. So if you ask ChatGPT, what are some kinds of stories that have not yet been written? Imagine for me, I'm asking ChatGPT. Here's what it came up with. Let's just start with the first one. I mean, I don't think most of us can go a month without being exposed to some movie or TV show about parallel realities, right? But I just very quickly went through and found, of course, all the examples, and these are just a few, right, of the narratives that this tool is pulling from. So it's replicating what it has already seen, which is fine if we know that's what it's doing, if we know that's all it can do, right? But we're being told something else. We're being told again and again that these tools are more than that these tools are more than mirrors made of math, that these tools are the keys to the future. And that's the threat, that's the danger, this illusion, which is almost in the book, I compare it to Alice and the Looking Glass, like being convinced that this mirror is not just a reflection, but a portal to some new fantastical world that she can enter, right? And people like Geoffrey Hinton have gotten lost in that mirror illusion. Many of you know the name Geoffrey Hinton as a legend in the AI community because it was his innovations that were a huge contributor to the advances in machine learning that gave us the tools that we have today. But go to any computer scientist who isn't paid to hype AI stock. Go to any machine learning researcher at a leading institution anywhere in the world in a computer science department. Ask them what they think about Geoffrey Hinton's opinions on AI. You'll see eyes roll all the way back in the head, right? He has no idea what he's talking about when he thinks about the capacities of AI. He says they have a common sense knowledge about everything. Everything I've just shown you should convince you, of course, that that's not the case. And we know that's not the case. But this is the narrative many of you have heard, right? Despite the fact that there's an immense amount of research done by AI companies themselves that shows that these tools actually don't think at all. And if you want to call what they do thinking, which you shouldn't because it's calculating, it's nothing like human thinking. It's a mathematical calculation of a path, an optimal path through a vector space. That's a multi-dimensional mathematical space. And the AI system is calculating an optimal path according to the learning algorithm that it has through that mathematical space to get the answer by the most efficient means possible. It does not need to reason. It does not need to think. That's why we get the answers as quickly as we do, right? And we have research showing that, in fact, these tools are not thinking. What they do is they memorize patterns of useful approaches to problems. But if you change the problem just a little bit in a way that a reasoner would recognize as invalidating that solution, they will still use that same solution because they're pattern matchers, pattern mirrors. And again, as I said, AI, the real AI experts, not Geoffrey Hinton, who made advances in this field 15 years ago, but the real AI experts at the cutting edge today are telling us this. Many of you have heard of the latest reasoning models for AI, tools that are supposed to be able to tell you how they got the answer, expose to you the chain of thought that they're going through. Again, that chain of thought wording, which the AI companies selected, is a way to convince you that this is a machine mind. But when they look, they find something that people like myself and Melanie Mitchell predicted a long time ago, which is that reasoning models would fabricate reasons in the same way that they fabricate any other answer, because that's all they're built to do. So what a reasoning model does when you ask it, how did you get that answer, is it guesses. And it activates a pattern, a familiar pattern of reasoning that it's seen in the training data, whether or not that pattern matches how it actually got its answer. So Apple did this really cool trick where they fed the model a hint that was the only way you could get the answer to the question, and then asked it, as a reasoning model, how did you get the answer? And it never reported the hint as the way it got the answer, even though we know from the way they set up the problem that the hint was the only way it could have solved the problem, right? So we know we can't trust these reasoning models. So in the most recent report, the conclusion is current LLMs are not capable of genuine logical reasoning. Instead, they attempt to replicate the reasoning steps observed in their training data. And yet we are being told to use these tools to make policy, to teach science, to make decisions about who will live and die. That should terrify you. And again, it's not that these models can't be useful, but we are completely being hoodwinked about what they're good for. And this rhetoric has a quasi-religious flavor to it, right? There are many who have written about the Silicon Valley ideology, sometimes called the Californian ideology, and it's kind of quasi-religious, or maybe not even quasi, dimensions. But it's not just like kind of weird tech subculture thing. I mean, it comes up in the way that mainstream media talk about it, right? What do the gods of generative AI have in store? This is the race to God mode. These are mirrors made of math, and we are treating them like gods. And when that doesn't work, what we end up doing, instead of acknowledging the limits of these tools, what happens is we start talking ourselves down. We start pretending that humans are just machines outputting predictive strings of text without doing any thinking. This is a very old tweet from 2023, but I've seen versions of this come up. In every talk that I've given, there's usually someone in the Q&A who'll say, oh, we just generate predictive strings of text, just like a machine learning model, right? How much of human interaction could boil down to autocomplete to some extent. So the counter strategy when these models are proven not to think is to say, we don't think either. Neil Postman in 1992 said technopoly, which he meant a culture that's enslaved to this kind of technical narrative, depends upon our believing that we are at our best when acting like machines. That's why my book says, in an age of machine thinking. The machines aren't doing any thinking, but we're treating ourselves as things that think like machines or must act like machines. And he says, among the implications of these beliefs is a loss of confidence in human judgment and subjectivity. So I open one of my chapters in the book with this quote from the Velvet Underground, right? I'll be your mirror, reflect what you are in case you don't know. The problem is not AI. The problem is we no longer seem to know what we are or what we do or how we do what we do, that we think, that we reason. And so we have companies like Cluely AI saying, why memorize facts, write code, research anything when a model can do it in seconds? Why not cheat? Why not just fake everything with AI? If everyone does it, it's normal. So in 2021, I wrote an article for Noema called The Thoughts the Civilized Keep, trying to ask this question of how can we protect the integrity of human thinking from this threat? Because if you think of our problems as like mountains, what we're being told is to fly to the top of those mountains on the back of a robot. A robot that didn't climb the mountain itself to get there. That is, it didn't think its way through the problems. It doesn't know the terrain of the mountain. It just got launched there by a mathematical catapult and got lucky to land on the peak with us on its back. That's not thinking, but more importantly, that's not understanding. And God help you if that's what you're relying on to do your thinking for you, because the next time you need to climb a mountain that the model hasn't seen, you're in deep, deep trouble. Mountain climbing is about the process. It's about learning the terrain. It's about coupling an intelligent mind and body with problems in a real physical world. And it's also a social activity. It's something that we learn from others how to do well and that we do best with others. We have to reconceive thinking in this way. And we have to remember that this is not all that AI mirrors can be. We can demand better from AI. Mirrors are incredible tools for diagnosis and inspection. They're tools for communication and seeing around corners. They're tools for instruction. We can still use AI tools selectively in these intelligent ways if we choose, if we demand. And I'll end by pointing out, as many of you will know, my research has largely been done through a lens of virtue ethics, thinking about the kinds of virtues that humans need to flourish, the most important one being practical wisdom, or what the Greeks called phronesis, the ability to make decisions in unfamiliar and challenging circumstances that are well calibrated to the situation and that are wise from not just a intellectual point of view, but also from a moral and political and social point of view. The translation of practical wisdom in English is often, as an alternative, is prudence. Well, I discovered when I was researching my book that when medieval and Renaissance thinkers depicted the virtue of prudence, they always depicted her as holding a mirror. And there's a whole interesting story about why that is and what the mirror might represent, right? But the point is that mirrors can be tools of wisdom. And as long as we're willing to use them as tools and not replacements for our own wisdom, they can be incredibly valuable extensions of human capacity. But in order for that to happen, we have to reshape the way we understand what it is to be human and what it is to live well with technology. Thank you. So now I think we're going to have a Q&A, and so anyone who wants to ask a question can just make their way over to the sides here and queue up on the right or the left. And please, those of you in the middle, if you see someone next to you who feels like they want to squirm out and ask a question, please let them out. Yes, we have a question here.
Thank you so much.
Yep, I think so.
Dr. Ramirez,
The mic's not on.
Do we have the... There we go.
Hello.
I might need, sometimes with these mics, you have to like get right into it. Yeah,
sometimes you have to look to the future and have a woman fix the mic.
there you go.
In
Yep.
front of a man who doesn't know how to do that. Dr. Ramirez, in a session earlier here at SEU, talked about de-skilling in AI.
Yes.
And I thought more and more about this. I teach mostly CTW. As a writing teacher, this has just been at the forefront of my thoughts ever since it broke. It seems to me that AI not only de-skills, it demotivates, it de-processes, it de-endures, it de-prides, it de-preps for future learning. All these things are happening. But with that negativity, too, one of the things that I'm just actually piggybacking on what you said, I've found a certain amount of solace in the idea that we have taken for granted how the human mind and heart operate, and that this threat is going to bring a huge clarity, shine a light by contrast. And I wonder if you share that as a somewhat, let's not say optimistic, but affirmative take on this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I do get this question a lot about, why I nevertheless remain cautiously, pragmatically optimistic. And one of the things that you just said was echoed by a philosopher of technology, an American philosopher of technology who wrote in the 1980s and 1990s. His name was Albert Borgmann. And he wrote about the way that technologies can distance us from ourselves, from our environments, and from what he called the focal practices that bring meaning to our lives, whether those are social practices or things like cooking or things like, navigating our physical surroundings. But one of the things he talked about was that the silver lining is that as we become more and more detached from focal practices by technology, sometimes what happens is that our love and appreciation for those is reawakened by the distance, right? What is it? Distance makes the heart grow fonder, right? Now, he doesn't say this is guaranteed, right? But the example that he uses that is compelling for most people, and is certainly even more true today than it was when he wrote it, was cooking. So he talked about the microwave as an example of this kind of distancing technology. And the microwave in the 1980s was not something you just used to heat up water or, some oatmeal. It was increasingly the thing that you were supposed to stick a whole meal in. I mean, people still do that. But most of the people I know today who use microwaves in the kitchen use it for smaller tasks, reheating things that were cooked in other ways, for example. But he was talking about this cultural push to use microwave to produce microwave-ready food. And it was, supposed to be like the generators in Star Trek that you just press a button and any cuisine that you want appears in front of you, right? But what he was pointing out is that this divorces us from the labor of finding food, being aware of what good and nutritious food looks like, having the tactile ability to actually, and the creative ability to actually merge ingredients and flavors, but also the social dependence that cooking brings in, and the way we teach cooking, and the way we use cooking as a way to come together. And all that was getting lost by the microwave. But what he said is, it's possible for that to be something that then reawakens the appreciation of cooking, and it becomes a more important practice than it was before. If you think about the way that cooking shows, and cooking as an art form, and the appreciation for the artistry of cooking has grown since the 1990s, right? Cooking in the 1980s was not treated as that culturally important in the United States, for example, and in lots of other countries where the microwave became dominant. But today, cooking is as culturally important as many of the other arts. So I think that's proof that what you say can happen, that by becoming distanced from something that's that central to our lives' meaning, we can be pulled back into its orbit. The only thing that I want to say, though, is that the AI narrative that I'm challenging has the largest political and economic actors on the planet forcing it down your throat. GE was not selling microwaves with that kind of urgency, right? Its marketing did not have that sort of political and economic force. So the counter narratives that we need to be that much stronger in order to not be overtaken by this power. So, Don.
So you talked about the fact that generative AI is going to continue to fabricate. Could companies that produce generative AI build in guardrails? Since they can't fix it, can they build in guardrails or other safety measures to protect citizens?
Well, I mean, so one of the things that they have done is something called retrieval augmented generation, which is meant to limit the risk or manage the risk of fabrication to some degree. It's a way of basically steering the model to keep its answer within a box of truthful, factual data that has been fine-tuned on later. So the model, again, will fabricate, but then it could steer its outputs to resemble more a subset of data that's been validated as true. So that's called retrieval augmented generation. But it is an imperfect solution. And it also limits the utility of the model to some degree because you're, in a sense, kind of boxing in its answers. So there's a trade-off between many of the guardrails that it would produce and the broader value of the tool. There's also the fact that, again, the narrative that they're pushing does not encourage people to use guardrails. So all of these AI companies will have on the site, you know, when you interact with the tool, something in fine print that says, you know, these models may not produce truthful responses, and you should not rely on them without validating the outputs, blah, blah, blah. But the way they talk about these models is you should be using them instead of your own minds, that these models can outthink you, that these models can outdecide you, that these models can make decisions that if a human made them, would be inferior. And so as long as they keep up with that narrative, the guardrails that they create will be used only by a very small minority of people that are sophisticated enough and motivated enough to take that kind of care. So there's ways to make the problem less damaging, but not if they continue to market AI as a machine intelligence, as something that is about to overtake us. Yes?
Hi. I was actually referred to apply to your graduate program, by the way.
Oh, great.
So, yeah, I'd love to talk to you after. So I consider myself kind of a cautious tech optimist in the sense that I just had a huge scandal in one of my classes for the entirety of the class using AI, and our professor's like, have you guys learned anything? No. But in terms of what you were saying earlier about the yearning for that kind of want of an art form, I feel like there'll eventually be some kind of yearning for thought, or more importantly, like creative thinking, and that this is just my hypothesis, is that one day we'll have this kind of system where those that have that yearning so much so that they will stop using these things to outsource their thought will kind of take on a different kind of class, be it like socioeconomically or those that have like given the privilege to be able to think on their own.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you your thoughts on that and the possibility of that happening
Yeah.
recently, or is it happening right now?
I think the possibility of that happening is high. I think it's imminent, and I think it's incredibly dangerous. So I am, by the way, a product of the absolute gift that was American public education and affordable higher education. I was the first person in my family to go to college, much less get a PhD. And it was only possible because of higher education that was immensely challenging and high quality being available in California in particular. That system has been eroding for decades, and it's now about to collapse, as many of you will be aware. And replacing it, being proposed to replace it, are AI-driven education programs that will essentially walk you through a university degree without you having to do any real hard thinking. Because the hard thinking that you have to do is something that has to be facilitated by professors with time and resource and deep expertise, and you can't get that on the cheap. So, for example, the Trump administration just made an executive order last week that was talking about using AI education in K through 12 all through the country through public and private partnerships, which means getting schools to partner with AI companies to develop AI learning tools for across the K through 12 curriculum. And what will happen is that it will be only those who can afford high-quality private education whose kids will escape that trap. And they will be sent, just as that was the case in the early 20th century, they will be sent to elite institutions where they will continue to learn how to think for themselves. And everyone else will be left with the AI scraps. And there is a political motivation to do that, because, by the way, if AI is your teacher, and it's being driven by an industry and government partnership, the government can make sure that that AI bot says what it wants it to say. And we're already going to see that happening in the very near term, where the AI companies start training their bots to conform to what the current government wants them to say about climate change, about racism, about vaccines, about basic science. So that is what the future of education will be if we allow it. And we saw this happen in some ways with the social media and smartphone transformation, where there were lots of stories about big tech company CEOs who had very rigid requirements for their kids to not have digital devices and to not learn with digital devices. So they made sure their kids continued to learn from people and paper, because they'd seen the evidence that actually the quality of learning would be light years ahead that way. And yet they wanted all of us to have our kids be learning through the tools that they build and profit from. We're seeing the same cycle happen with AI. So, yes, I don't think that true thinking will go away, but it will become a private and gate-kept resource that only the powerful can access, unless we fight that. Yes?
Not sure this was on.
Yes. Sometimes it takes a second.
Okay, it is now.
Okay.
So we're talking about things that might happen in the more distant future, and you mentioned cooking to talk about the appreciation of human things, and it unfortunately reminded me that we're cooking the planet right now.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, at the rate and scale of deployment of generative AI in particular, which is the most consumptive in terms of energy and water and all of those things, I don't think we can afford to wait to see the long-term consequences.
Right.
So how do we get the same urgency to the need to apply wisdom in all of the ways that you mentioned to match the urgency with which everybody's now putting the generative AI into everything.
Yeah.
What can we do to speed up the process of teaching the need for wise choices around AI?
Reactivate social and cultural support for climate justice and for the activism that goes with it. So one of the most interesting things about the last 10 years has been the demonization of environmental movements and the demonization of climate activists. And then, of course, extended today to the demonization of climate scientists. The news today was that the Trump administration just dismissed all of the authors of its own government climate report, which is supposed to give the state of play for the climate in the country today. They're all gone. But voters, to be honest, are on the hook for that because we have allowed the environmental and climate movements to be treated as somehow antisocial or somehow extremist. And this is the politics we get, and this is the policy we get as a result. I write about this in the end of the book a little bit because I feel this very deeply. Just today in the UK, the Tony Blair Institute said we're not going to get anywhere with a climate policy that wants to phase out fossil fuels. Forget it. We can't ask people to consume less. We can't ask people for a green energy transition. And to its credit, so far, the Labour government, which has been in lockstep with the Tony Blair school for the entirety of this administration so far, has actually today said, no, we don't agree. We are not going back on our climate commitments. We'll see how long that holds. But I want to point out it's not just in the US that we're seeing this retrenchment and backtracking from commitments to climate justice. When crops start failing and people start dying in droves because they don't realize how fragile our systems are and how close they are to collapse, we'll see some political winds shift. But a lot of people will starve to death before that happens, if that's what we're waiting for. So if you don't want to wait that long, start reactivating social support and endorsement for climate activism and defense and climate science right now. And make it a political issue that no one gets your support unless this is something they are willing to defend. That's all I got to say on that. Yeah.
Hello. So you already have responded to half of my question. So thank you first. And so I was wondering. I found it phenomenal. I found it a great talk, and I was wondering how does your thinking relate to other aspects of other problematic aspects of AI development, such as the fact that a lot of this has been built on data that was extracted without knowledge and consent, on the one hand. And then you already addressed this partly, but the fact that, the sort of the AI hype machine is very dedicated to sort of facing the material basis of all this data production in the form of raw materials for data centers or energy demands.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a great question. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. But part of the industry narrative here is to make this seem like magic, and magic that appears out of nowhere, as I said, like an alien intelligence that lands on us instead of something we build with people and things, and at great costs, both environmentally and from a labor standpoint. And we have a huge, in the UK, resistance to AI around, and I don't know how strong it is here, but there's a huge resistance to AI, generative AI now in the UK that's based around the creative sector and the violation of the intellectual and creative rights of artists and authors and musicians, and the way that the economic capacity of people to generate a living through creative work has essentially vanished as a result of this AI revolution. So there's a lot that needs to be brought back into view about what AI is made of. AI is made of our work, our thoughts, our ideas, our efforts, and it's made of water and rare earth minerals and fossil fuels and all the things that are needed to keep it running. It is not an immaterial technology. One of the ways that this has been made most visible is through the arts and the collaboration between the arts and humanities and social sciences. So many of you will be familiar with this particular work of art. It's on the wall, last time I was there, of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It takes up a wall about this big. It's Kate Crawford and Vlad Joler's Anatomy of an AI, which is a giant black and white schematic of a particular AI device. And it's an older artwork, so I think they used an Amazon Echo as the example. But they mapped out everything that went into it, including the material economy and the labor economy. And it's an incredible work of art. I mean, it's just fascinating and beautiful to look at. You can also view it online. If you type, I think it's just anatomy-of-an-AI.com. It's so big that you have to just move your cursor around and look at different parts of it. You literally have to put it on a whole wall to see it all at once. But the arts are a tremendous power for cultural change and for shifting the cultural imagination. And I think we can do more to show what AI is made of to people in a way that might help correct this tendency to see it as something ephemeral and invisible and magical.
Hi, my name's Lauren Wright. I'm actually a former public school teacher, and I left, and it was the hardest thing I had to do because I knew that no one's standing up for our kids in law and government. So my question for you is, one of my biggest fears around AI is this narrative that we're deficient, and not the way that we think is deficient. And I'm terrified of our children growing up with that narrative.
Yes.
What can we do to protect our education system and to protect our children?
Yeah. At this point, what we can do is both the sort of top-down narratives that we teach and that we share widely, but then there's the bottom-up stuff, the joining the school boards, annoying the school boards until they understand what's at stake here, helping parents in schools understand. Right now, most schools have kids in families where their parents think that the more AI is involved in their education, the better off their kids are going to be. Because AI is the future, right? And the more their kids are doing with AI, the more parents are like, okay, my kid is on the cutting edge. But that cutting edge is a cliff. And as you say, and I'm fighting it in my own classes. I told a story at lunch today about how one of my own classes, so if I can't counter this narrative in my own classes, right, that shows you how hard this is. I have a class of 300 students where one of the central part of the course has failed this year because 30% of the students were convinced that they could use ChatGPT to fake a genuine dialogue with fellow students that was part of the core activity of the course. And the other 70% were so insulted and mortified by the fact that the other 30% of the students were faking their interactions with them that they stopped participating in the entire activity. And so I'm having to have this conversation with my class about why are we here? What are we here to do? What is learning? We have taken these things for granted. And so we have a culture where people think learning, people think education is about going out and getting whatever the AI industry tells you is the latest job. Remember 5 years ago when they told you everyone was going to be employed as a prompt engineer? Jeez, right? I mean, no one even tries that anymore. But the idea is learning is about thinking. becoming capable of thinking. And we don't incentivize teachers to develop those things. We don't resource them to develop those skills. And we don't reward kids for demonstrating those skills. We reward kids for passing tests. And we've known for a long time that this is going to degrade the quality of education, and we've let it happen. So just like I said, there needs to be a reinvigoration of activism around climate. And we can't all be activists for everything, so you got to pick your thing, right? But you got to pick something and fight for it. And fighting for education, fighting for the integrity of education, fighting for reforms that will actually preserve the value of human thinking is really vital right now. And I choked up too when you talk about that narrative of kids being told that the way they think is deficient, and that the way that they think is already headed to the scrap heap, and that how a machine thinks is what is the standard now. And they're just an underperforming meat machine. And I've heard people, engineers in Silicon Valley, say that without irony, that we are just underperforming meat machines that need to be replaced by more efficient silicon minds. You need to fight that with everything you have. And we need to fight it together, because if you let individuals just try to carry this weight on themselves, they just break down. And they have to get out. They burn out because they can't be effective. So it's not about being a moral hero on your own. It's about finding like-minded people that you can collaborate with and organize with and work with together to put pressure where it needs to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. So just a little background about myself. I'm a librarian here for Applied Sciences. Hello, if you're in the Applied Sciences, this is my second day. I'm your new librarian.
Welcome.
I'm very excited because I conduct research on the complex relationship and intersectionality of copyright and AI, especially with generative AI. And I loved that you talked about how it's a reflection and the darker parts of history are reflected in AI, and that's a big argument right now within copyright, because a lot of people who are against generative AI's consumption of copyrighted material argue that, well, they can just consume public domain material.
Yeah.
But as we know, and some of you may know, public domain has a lot of certain restrictions to it, and one of them is that it does usually have a date to it. Currently, anything before published before 1930 is in the public domain.
Yeah.
That's old stuff. But that's the material that some argue is better than copyrighted work. I have all of this. This is leading somewhere. Your story about the microwaves and how they used to be so, like, this was the thing, this was revolutionizing cooking in the kitchen, this is how the world will be, don't worry about slaving over a hot stove anymore, and now it's just an everyday use. I come all of this to say I would love to hear your opinion on the recent United States Copyright Office decision to allow AI-generated artwork to now receive copyright protections in the United States on a case-by-case basis, with the argument that if joint authorship can be proven, then they'll review it, and if they feel that it is significant enough, they'll grant it. And I'm just interested to hear, based on the idea that we can't have these systems consuming outdated information. I mean, we can. But just with the idea of trying to be in the middle ground of allowing consumption of up-to-date stuff, of up-to-date research, if we're able to be in these machines. But at the same time, it's a tool. So what are your thoughts on that? Because it could be argued to be used as a tool, much like photography was very much argued against, that it was a machine, it wasn't a human. You aren't giving that. So I would just be really intrigued to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, so one of the things that's really interesting about generative AI is that when it first came out in 2021, 2022, creators and artists were actually really excited. And they didn't look at it as the enemy. They didn't look at it as, there were a few, but for the most part, there was a kind of cautious interest, right? Let's see what these tools can do, because artists have been using tools always, right? As you say, tools are not inimical to the creative process. And so artists have been using digital tools for a long time, and this was initially seen as just one more tool in the toolkit to play with, right? But that has completely switched around to a perception of this thing as a direct attack on the arts and culture, and human culture in particular. And so it's not, what I want to say is, it's not just about copyright, and it's not just about what inevitably needs to happen for these tools to work. And I always tell people to resist the argument about inevitability. I'm glad you said, like, well, we could actually just let them train on that old stuff. That would be a real trade-off, though. So it's not just then about the law, and it's not just about getting the tools to work. It's also about what preserves the value of the culture that these things are learning from or being trained on. And in order to do that, I think you have to have agency from human creators and choice. So one of the things that really has not yet happened is for there to be a serious conversation about licensing and consent and compensation of artists who opt in to training, having models trained on their content, right? Making it worthwhile. And in order for that to happen, the AI companies would have to act in ways that showed themselves to be a good faith partner for the creative industries. And if you had that, I think you would have a very different situation with the copyright dilemma, because you'd have a lot of people who would be happy to opt in if they were dealing with a trustworthy partner that wasn't trying to destroy their livelihoods and industry in order to replace it. So I think there are licensing regimes that could both benefit AI companies and creators, but that requires a much more equal and level playing field of power than the AI companies are currently willing to entertain. And so for the time being then, I fully support creators' kind of refusal to participate in this voluntarily and the prosecution of their rights to the extent that they're allowed. Because until there is some parity and some willingness to work together in good faith, I don't see why creatives should allow themselves to be stolen from in this way.
Shannon, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all. And thank you for the great conversation and for staying a little late to have it with me. Appreciate it.
One quick announcement. If you want to hear Shannon give a different talk entirely, she's going to be with us this Friday. We're going to do an event all day Friday called Celebrating Digital Dignity Day. It's going to be from 8:30 to 5 in the St. Clair room in the Learning Commons, or you can view it. We're going to be streaming those. If you want to come to the Markkula website, you can register. You have to register to be there in person or to get it online. So we have a whole host of speakers, but Shannon's going to be the keynote.